welcome to this edition of the Great White North Report. I'm your host, Roman DSLP. In the news on CBC, we have something about the diplomats warning the federal government about getting too tight with China during a committee hearing. And I find this very interesting that we're still looking for ways to deal with China, especially with the coronavirus. I would just completely shut them out, cancel all flights. I know Air Canada already canceled flights to that country. I would definitely cancel all flights, get every citizen I could out of there, and to make them pay for their mistakes, I would actually boycott the 2022 Olympics to teach them a lesson not to lie about things of this that are this serious. So a global affairs document warns of China's long-term strategic challenge to Canada's interests and values, and this has been going on for decades. It's just we've been really slow to acknowledge it. These were a bunch of briefing papers released by a House of Commons committee to show that Canada's professional foreign service has been warning politicians that it's dangerous for Ottawa to get too close to China. And this is true anywhere. You just look at a map of the world and see how many countries have gotten so close to China and how much of the debt trap diplomacy been employed. So there were 7 documents, and they were released by the Commons Committee on Canada-China Relations. Now, this was formed in January after opposition parties united to outvote the Liberal minority who opposed the creation of such a committee. So the Liberals didn't want anyone else messing with China but them, which I find to be absurd because everyone needs to know the danger when dealing with China, and you shouldn't hide anything. Now, hopefully, this will set the stage for strategic advice on the approach to relations with China. Hopefully, according to Deputy Minister Martha Morgan, that the paper will distill the new approach to China and that Minister Champagne has called for a new framework for Canada-China relations. I'm all in favor of decoupling. Already more and more companies are heading to Vietnam, which is a far more benign nation to deal with. Even though it is still a communist country, it's not as scary as dealing with China. After all, it was Napoleon who once famously quoted, "To let China, the sleeping giant, lie." And he was correct. I would rather have kept China in the dark ages. So this paper was written in October 2019, warned that while Canada has long framed its China policy through the lens of an economic opportunity, which is true, a lot of people have gone there to try and make money, it now needs to take account of Beijing's long-term strategic challenge to Canada's interests and values. Basically, the economic approach has failed. Too many companies go into China and come up with less than what they hope for. They've also cited the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank as an example of how Beijing promotes perspectives on governance, economic security, and human rights that diverge in fundamental ways from Canada's. Now, what's interesting, I find, is that the Trudeau government has bought a stake in the bank and committed to giving it $256 million over 5 years. You got to be kidding me. I would not give anything to a Chinese bank. That much money. Don't we already give them foreign aid? We've given them another $50 million in foreign aid over the last 5 years. Come on, people, wake up. Why would I give them money? My taxpayer money is going to fund this bank for what? So they can put another nation in a debt trap situation? Just ask Malaysia how that's working out. The Philippines, Duterte is more of a pro-Chinese, even though I like the guy as a president for the Philippines. He is pro-Chinese, which I don't like, and a lot of the infrastructure projects are actually not employing Filipinos, but employing Chinese to come abroad and work them. Now, the Chinese ambassador to Canada, Kong, said it was a mistake to view China as a strategic rival. No, it's not. I view China just like we viewed Russia back in the Cold War. China is one of those countries that is a bully and is just taking what it wants. Now, Kong went on to say that he doesn't want to be a rival of any country, which is bullshit, because they're trying to be a rival of the United States. And for the Chinese, we pursue a foreign policy of peace and independence. Yeah, right. Just ask the people of Tibet, the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, and the Mongolians of Inner Mongolia how well that works. Ask the people of Taiwan how well that's working. So he goes on to say they would like to develop friendly relations with any country that would like to do the same with China. Well, we've tried. And this is what we get. This article goes on to say how the outreach has failed, and I quite agree. We have a boom or bust of Canadian engagement with China. Ever since the Pierre Trudeau era, we've been trying to work out trade deals with China. I think it was more successful in the 80s when China was in a hurry to modernize. I had an uncle in China who worked for Northern Telecom, and he was working in China. But then Northern Telecom, or Nortel, collapsed soon after we helped them out. Now, the Harper government showed little interest in building ties with China, and Harper had a good reason to be concerned and not really willing to push into China. A lot of American companies and industries fled to China during that time to set up shop there for the cheap labor. Harper did absolutely nothing with China. Now, with Trudeau, he's visited China 13 times in 2016, including a week-long visit by Trudeau himself. And Finance Minister Bill Morneau was in the country 3 times that year. And they've continued with visits in 2017 and 18. So we're trying to woo China at a time when China is being more and more assertive. Now, all that has changed when we arrested the Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou in Vancouver of December 1st, 2018. What happened? China arbitrarily detained 2 Canadians, Michael Korvig and Michael Spavor, for no real reason. And since then, in 2019, there was one small business minister, Mary Ning, spent 2 days in Dallas in July. So there really hasn't been any ministerial talks, nothing big, because we know we can't do anything. So basically, engagement with China has not produced the desired outcomes. It's not a win-win for anyone. It's more of a win for China. The Chinese government's position remains unchanged when it comes to the detentions of Canadian citizens, and that until we release Meng Wanzhou, they will not release any Canadians. The paper goes on to say that we should work around China rather than work with it, and I quite agree. It's time for us to build closer relations with countries like the Philippines, Japan, South Korea, Australia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, India, because India is the natural rival to China in that area. There are a couple of border disputes. So the Communist Party of China, they continue to bolster an assertive foreign policy demeanor. Canada must promote and defend its values in close partnerships. Well, it's kind of hard to do that when we don't have a military to speak of, especially our Navy. We really need to get our naval ships beefed up and stop the bullshit that comes with that. And the crisis in December of 2018 demonstrated Beijing's readiness and ability to use aggressive economic and political levers to punish Canada. And that's happened with other countries. Other countries who said and did something against China that have suffered. So are we bankrolling Chinese expansion? Well, if we give them $256 million, even though that doesn't sound like a lot, it is helping China to exert influence and advance its commercial interests. It also promotes its authoritarian model of government, even though that authoritarian model of government can thank its success on the back of capitalism. The Chinese Communist Party is not really communist anymore. They've moved away from that because it wasn't working, pure and simple. It's only when capitalism showed up with bags full of money that they realized that they could this is the way to stay in power, was to keep their own citizens working and well fed. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and Belt and Road initiatives as a means of pushing that model on the developing world, meaning debt trap diplomacy. All you have to do is ask Sri Lanka how much use they get out of that port that was built with that kind of money. Same with Pakistan, same with Eritrea, now Ethiopia, Kenya, South Africa. The list is going to go on and on and on. So China is using alternative forms to leverage its economic prowess to gain regional influence and export its model of government around the world. And they command new political leverage over an increasing number of vulnerable democracies in Latin America and the Caribbean, which are always not the most stable in the world. Venezuela being the latest. So we really need to look at China through a different lens. I've always viewed them with suspicion, with dislike, and you use the New Zealand model of how that works. As its public life has been penetrated and influenced by China to an alarming degree, and we have that here in Canada. The Confucius Institute is one of the big ones. Anyone who doesn't believe me, go to our local Walmart or any bookstore and pull out a map of the world and see if it has the 9-dash line, or if it has Taiwan in the same color as China, and a certain area in the Himalayas that India actually controls. China is already trying to get people used to their claims in the South China Sea, even though that claim was rejected by an international tribunal. Now, Canada's ambassador to China, Dominic Barton, appeared before the Commons on February 5th. Barton's former company, McKinsey, did some consulting work for a group involved in China's construction of militarized artificial islands in the South China Sea. So this guy shouldn't be the ambassador to China. indirectly helped China build these little sandbars out where there was none before. So there goes that's an ecological impact right there, to build militarized reefs to reinforce their claim to the South China Sea Zone, which is so far away. The 9-dash line, they call it. Obama let them get away with it. President Obama. What a joke he was. So these projects violated international law. Barton said he did not know the Canadian government's position. Well, you should ask for those things before you do these. So this guy, he's already in China's pocket from what I can see. A lot of Ambassador Barton's comments before the committee, were being criticized as being an echo of Chinese propaganda. Barton said that the Chinese people, they place an importance on the values of collectivism and harmony owing to a Confucian heritage. Again, bullshit. Collectivism is dead in China. Harmony is dead. Just look what's happening with the coronavirus in Hong Kong. They don't follow Confucian heritage anymore either. And Barton went on to say that the understanding the extent of China values unity and the needs of society at large rather than the freedom of individual choice. We just have to understand that. Now, Charles Burton, a former Canadian diplomat in Beijing who now teaches at China's government at Brock University, told the committee this week he was taken aback to read those comments. And he said, quote, "Let me point out this assertion by our ambassador is consistent with the official propaganda of the Chinese Communist Party under Chairman Xi Jinping. The Chinese Communist Party upholds its legitimacy by claiming that China's traditional culture demands, in modern age, a non-democratic single-party autocratic rule." Which is true. Basically, the Chinese Communist Party is just another dynasty. So what can we do? We can disconnect on trade. Because of Chinese discriminatory trade policies against Canada have contributed to the increase in Canada's trade deficit with China. Canadian exports have been restricted and Chinese imports have continued unabated. Well, time to put tariffs on Chinese imports, like the United States has done. Hurt their economy. Already their economy is being hurt anyway. It's time to start looking for a new supply chain. Yeah, and if possible, bring back Canadian jobs. Here's a classic example. Turns out all the hockey sticks that NHL players use are made in China. You gotta be kidding me. Well, I'd slap a tariff on that right away. Any sports equipment made in China. Jerseys, whatnot. See, the NHL is making a profit off us. And the NHL also supports Huawei, by the way. They allow Huawei advertisement on Hockey Night in Canada, which is why I will not watch it anymore, nor will I buy a hockey jersey. Our commercial interests are dependent on the Chinese market, are vulnerable to sudden and arbitrary trade disruption. Canadian exporters and investors continue to experience problems, obviously. Meanwhile, Ambassador Barton made no secret that he remains bullish on Chinese as a business partner. No, it's not. We're not partners with them. Telling the committee you'd love to talk more about promoting trade and investment. I think it's time to move on. Head for another country. Now, Barton's telling us that kind of talk is sending the wrong message to a country that is holding Canadian citizens arbitrarily. Hey, we can hold their citizens too arbitrarily if we had the balls to do it. I'm perfectly prepared to do that. Basically what China is doing is hostage diplomacy, and the imposition of arbitrary trade sanctions on Canada is a policy that works. Anyway, that's all I have for today about the newest on the China-Canada relations. I'd like to hear what my fellow Canadians think what we should do. Should we start punishing China or just let it slide? And until next time, this is Roman Diesel. I'm out of here.